This is about Vatican II. I love Vatican II. Now, everybody that's 50 years or younger came after Vatican II. Because it was 1962 to 65. And I was ordained in 63. So I'm right in the middle of this thing, and I've grown up with it. It's the biggest influence in my life that I can think of, besides family, parents, and you folks. No.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, Pope John the 23rd called that council in 1959. And he said, I'd like to have a council of the church, which we haven't had. We just looked it up. 1869 was the last council. So we're talking 100 years. We hadn't had a council for 100 years. He said, I want to have one in 1963. This was 59. He was giving them 4 years. The Curia, who are the bad guys in this story, said we could never do it by 60. He said, okay, we'll do it in 62. That was John. He was a joker. Somebody said to him one time, how many people work in the Vatican? He said, about half. That's an old joke. He knows that old joke. Somebody was taking his picture. He was a big guy. And they said, could you pull it in your stomach? He said, I can pull it in, but where am I going to put it? Drum roll. So, that kind of surprised the church. Our Bishop Brady, in those years between 59 and 62, was on the preparatory commissions. He died in Rome during that time, working on this council. But here's something, one, you would not find 10 more people in the United States like me to give this talk, because I was at this council in 1965. 1965.
How many went from the U.S.?
How many went from the U.S.?
Yes, how many?
The bishops? Well, how many died? They went every diocese.
Well, how'd you go up and win a bishop?
Because I was a secretary to the bishop, and I had worked non-stop for about 20 months. And this is how he rewarded me. And I was a pup. I shouldn't have been there. But from here, Bishop Shannon went, Bishop Cowley went, Bishop Dins went, and I was his secretary. So we were buddies over there. And then some other people, I'll tell you my other joke. I was going to save the joke till the end. Bernie Casserly, do you remember him? He was the editor of the Catholic paper. And he came to cover that council. So he and I were sitting in a coffee shop on the Via Veneto, which is a shishi place with all kinds of fashionable stores. And his wife came to visit him. He was there for a couple months, but she came. And he saw her walking up the other side of the Via Veneto. And he said, if my wife gets through Rome without being pinched, she's going to feel bad. So he went over and pinched his wife. She had a purse and she swung around. I can start now loose here. You're not going to be able to see this, and I don't have to write on this very long. But I want to do something. I said, there aren't 10 people like me who have been at that council because I was so young and everybody else died at. And this I have never seen done, which I'm going to do right now.
Yeah.
You want to see my fast draw? You want to see it again? All right. You got it. 1861. This is going to be the Civil War. So it started with the canning of Fort Sumter, Charleston Harbor. And it went to 1865, Appomattox Courthouse. I'll just put a L here for Lincoln, because he went through all that, and then he got assassinated. And then we went into a tailspin. It's called the Reconstruction, because the South kind of raised its head again, you know, and the Jim Crow stuff and slavery kind of went back into vogue, and people that shouldn't have been running things began to run things again. And then, somewhere along here, we got wisdom again. In 1965, and they did the civil rights laws. Note, it takes 100 years from 1861 to 1965 to have what the Civil War was about come to fruition. Watch this. Vatican Council, 1962. I said that's when it started. It ended 1965. Vatican II. And there was a Pope, Paul VI. John the 23rd called the council, but he only lived through the first session. Paul VI lived through the rest of the council and then to 1978. Paul. Then what happened there happened here. We went into a tailspin, I think. Because when he died, then John Paul became the Pope, and he was a Pope for a long time, and he appointed a lot of people who didn't like the Vatican Council to be bishops, and so we did our own little downhill here. Now, I'm suggesting we have 100 years till 2062 to get this thing right, because the Civil War, it took 100 years. The Vatican Council is going to take us 100 years. That's why this is not an old news deal tonight. It's still with us. And this Pope, I think, is the savior of the Vatican Council, because he's saying we should be Vatican II people. What does that mean? What I want to talk about tonight is what we left behind, what ended with that Vatican Council, which some of us over 50 may miss, and others never saw it, so they don't miss it. And then, what did we take along for that council? What changed our life? That we still have most of it. And then end up with some future issues and some solutions to problems that we have today that I think the Vatican Council could answer, like sexual abuse, like loss of members in the church, like I think we haven't learned to love enough. We've learned to use our heads more than our hearts. How do we do that? Is that okay? And then question and answer anywhere along the way, because it'll be fun. Purposes of the council in Pope John the 23rd's mind. Awareness of the church. Take a look at the church. Renewal of the church. He talked about it in terms of opening the windows and letting fresh air in. Christian unity. All these scattered Protestant and Catholic bodies shouldn't be like that. And dialogue with the world. So there were 4 main documents from that council. Here's a couple books. What Happened at Vatican II. This is a good guy, and these are the documents of the Vatican Council. So if you want to look up books, I've read through that thing. I wore out one of these, and I've read through the second one. So the main documents in this, there were like 16 documents, but 4 of them are I think think they're called the documents, the main documents of the council. They are about liturgy, church, the word, and the modern world. And there are other documents about religious life, sisters and brothers, communications, and go on. There's like 16 altogether. I don't know what they all are. But, so that's the structure. What did we leave behind? Try to remember. So before this council happened, in 62, we had things like Latin. We spoke in Latin and nobody understood it. In fact, the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston went to this council, and the council was in Latin. And he said, if the council is going to be in Latin, the American church is going to be the Church of Silence. And he went home. No. The daily masses were mostly for the dead, and mostly in black vestments. It was kind of a somber time. Couldn't even meet on Fridays. Priests and sisters were in charge of most things. The sisters ran the schools and the priests ran the parish, and there weren't others. Mostly at funerals there were dirges. Dies irae, dies irae. And I went on, and the words are worse than the song. At least the way I sing it. Triumphalism or exceptionalism, like we're the top of the mountain, we Catholics. And the ghetto, we're not only on top of the mountain, but we were closed in, walled in, walls. There was a hierarchical definition of the church. Which is the church? It's either a building or it's the Pope and the bishops. That's what we said before the council. Listen to what we said afterward. Marriages between two Christians but not Catholics were in the rectory. I still got that in the hall out here the other day. Why? No, I won't say that. Non-participation in Protestant worship, you couldn't go. Because that was a sin or something. The Counter-Reformation, that was not a bad thing. That was the Jesuits trying to talk back to the Protestant Reformation. So they tried a good thing. That was not something to get rid of. A European church, the Catholic Church was mostly identified with Europe and the United States. Not, well, South America, but not very actively in terms of the politics of the church. They did their own. But like Africa, no. Asia, no. Australia, maybe. And authoritarianism. If I said it, you do it. And you could probably name a bunch of other things. Now that's pre-Vatican II. Some want us to go back, like that one, want us to go back to authoritarian days and ways, you know. That second Pope, Benedict, was like that. He was a very conservative, theologically conservative Pope, and they would put down the law. One of the things that the Vatican Council did was to bring love to be more important than law, or the way I said it, or we said it was, before the council there was a love of law, after the council there was a law of love. We're still working on that one, because we're pretty heady. All right, so let's go through those little documents, and I'll just pick out some things that have changed in our life now because of those documents from 50 years ago about the church. The people are the church. This is one of the headlines that we came away from that council with. And it's not quite true. It was hijacked a little bit, because in this thing, it would say in the document on the church, it starts with the people are the church, but the people are everybody. The bishops and the priests and the men and the women and the young and the old, and the people are the church. And we kind of took it over to say the people, not the hierarchy, not the priests. The people run the church, or should. And that's not a bad idea, as I'll say later on. And not only that, but I was at the last session of that council. It was on December 8th, 1965. The feast of what? Immaculate Conception. Outdoor, in front of St. Peter's. I was going to save these joke stories till the end, but I'll say one of them now. There were all these bishops, 2,600 bishops came in a procession, 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. And so you can see the front of St. Peter's, and then there was an altar, and then down below were just benches like you'd have at a hockey game. And these 2,600 had to get on the benches. And we were in bleachers on the side watching this. And we said, it's not going to work. And so one of the bishops on the way home in the bus, we lived at a hotel nearby, but he was at our hotel, he said, those benches weren't made for the fullness of the priesthood. You won't hear that story anywhere else because I heard it in the bus. I don't know if anybody ever said it. But, speaking of but, the people of the church, and we didn't use the word ministry. It's not in here. If you look in the old session of this, book of this, it said ministry. Look up priest, deacon. Like that was it. But the people took it over the next day. There were youth ministers. They were hanging out shingles. Pastoral ministers. Eucharistic, extraordinary ministers of communion. Justice ministers. Ecumenical ministers. They were all over the place. It really took hold. It's one of the big things that came from the council, was that the people are the church, and the ministry of the church is everybody's. Sometimes I use sports gestures. Collegiality. It's a big word. Means collaborate on things. And what that led to was parish councils, if you have one. I was just at a council with the bishop yesterday, the Presbyteral Council. He's trying to put together another council. You guys, our parish council, this is like right now stuff. Our parish council here is supposed to name a person to go to the deanery meeting of the 8 persons from the other parishes in this deanery, which is probably over to Stillwater and so on. And that group is supposed to pick one representative from that deanery to go to meet with the bishop, so the lay people have a voice in the bishop's world. Collegiality. We didn't have that. The universal call to holiness and ministry. And here's a big revolution that took place, and that is that baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist became more important than ordination. Before the council, if you said, what's the role of the laity, they would have said, the role of the laity is, Catholic action is the participation of the laity in the work of the hierarchy. It was the bishop's job, ministry. After the council, it said, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist makes you a member of that church called to holiness and to ministry. Your ministry comes from baptism, not from ordination. And that struggle is still going on. And you can kind of predict where I hope it goes. Toward the primacy of baptism. I go to those meetings with the bishop without a collar. There's one other guy in the room like that. There's 30 of us. Collar. And they never ask me why. But if I said why, I would say, I'm trying to emphasize baptism. We're all baptized. And you can get kind of puffed up about being ordained. We don't need that. We need priesthood. But we don't need the politics that have come with that in terms of... And I sometimes say to you folks, when you say, Father, would you pray for me or for someone who has died? I said, well, you pray. Your prayers are as good as my prayers. Oh, no. Priest's prayers are better than baptized prayers. Not so. How are we doing? This document on the church, which was, the liturgy was the first document of these four that came out. Because they were ready for it, because St. John's, Collegial, had prepared the world for it along with some German monks. So we had a years of how should the liturgy look from them, and the council took that over and said, well, that's how the church should look. One example, the liturgy people would say, we want full, active, and conscious participation in the liturgy. That's a big change. We used to be even quieter than we are. If I look around, I don't want to say that. You can tell who's full, conscious, and active in that church. The kids. You watch those kids bring those gifts up and they run. They bring the gifts up, boom, they run back. Or the other day we had one of those dismissals for their own gospel, and the kid ran down. He was late, ran down, and then somebody there must have said, no, this is for older kids. Ran back. Full, active, and conscious participation. I'm going to recommend at the end, that's the solution to some of the problems we have. And we're not there yet. We still have a deference to an authority, or deference to, well, you had training in theology, you know more about it. No. You know life better than I know life. Families, teach you something I never got. So, from the liturgy that the St. John's people said, we don't want you to be silent and passive there. We want you to be full, active participants, conscious participants. And so when they wrote the church, they came to that same conclusion. And that means that your opinion, your way of doing things in this parish are as or more important than anybody else's. And speak it fully and consciously and actively. And it would change the church. I know that looks like democratization, and I'm not opposed to much more democratization in our church. We're not a democratic church. We're a regal, royal, one pope church. We'll get back to that in a minute. The diaconate, Tom. There was no diaconate that we knew before that council. And it was really for the African church that they put the diaconate in there, but the American church took it over. The idea of deacon. And then we had a struggle about what does that mean? Oh, we have substitute priests, deacons. They're not. What the deacon's supposed to be is a servant. And he can't serve everything, or she, could be she deacon sometimes. It's just supposed to be a mirror so that all of us see, that's how you serve. I can serve like that guy serves. But they also added him into the liturgy, so he reads, he preaches, and he's there at the altar to show that all these ministries should cooperate around that table. Another role of a deacon, but not as an administrator of a parish. When they say we don't have enough priests, well, we got a bunch of deacons. They should take over. I think other people should take over parishes if there aren't priests, but not deacons necessarily. Like that? A lot of frown, Gary. Ecumenism. Church is getting along. This council said, not that the Catholic Church is the only church and everybody else doesn't count. It started, yes, we're the central because we have the fullest expression of church, but the other Christian churches are churches. They never said that before. Lutherans are church. Episcopalians are church, and they went out in circles. The Jews are next circle. And believers in other divine ways are next circle, and maybe unbelievers altogether. We're all in a concentric kind of configuration, and that's what we have to work toward in terms of ecumenism. We're getting there. It's not a perfect society. Pope John Paul called it, said it was aggiornamento. And someplace in there is the word jour, like French for day. Bring the church into the present day. Aggiornamento. Bring it up to date. And it's always in need of that renewal. It's not a static, fixed church, just hand it on, but don't mess with it. Mess with it. And a synodal church. After that council, the Pope brought together, because we didn't have a council every 5 years, we should maybe have one soon, but they had synods. And you're going to hear that from this bishop who wants to call a synod of this church. And I'm recommending to him, all right, well, give the people something to say about church. Tell them it's your job to say what the next year's themes should be. What should the church work on next year? Youth, ecumenism, environment, justice, blah, 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 blah. Give the bishop a couple, 3 choices at least. And that's your role. It's kind of a more adult church. This is that we're in. It was more a juvenocracy, kids. We put all this money into parochial schools and other kind of schools, but adults are given a lot more job. You train the kids. You're the first teachers, and you take charge of this church. And adult education, that's what this is. Came somewhat from that. That's the first document. Second document, liturgy. Again, full, conscious, active participation. I think those screens are good in church. More people sing with those screens than with the books, because you got like this. But some people don't like them. Anyway, we ought to find ways that the people can be an active part. There's our environmental guru. Anyway, so those are all those roles, and the wise church said the liturgists were right. Everybody, somebody can read, somebody can preach, somebody can decorate, somebody can sing, somebody can usher, somebody can care for the sick in the church. That's the way the church should be. Not only the liturgies. Everybody has a part, a unique ministry each one has in liturgy and in church. That was really a distribution of power and life. So, another of their principles, which is maybe the best principle that I know out of the council, and that is the primary and indispensable source of the true Christian spirit is the liturgy. Or another way to say it is the liturgy is the source and summit of our life. If you want to say, where do I get holier? That's where you get holier. And test your spirituality by the spirituality of that liturgy. And it's not just a mass. It's like the church year, goes through all those mysteries of the year, or it's all the sacraments, some of which are in the Sunday worship. And it's kind of simple and direct. And one of the things, there was a priest by the name of Ladislaus Sleds who spent some time in a concentration camp in Poland during the Second World War. He came back, he was in charge of St. Philip's Church in Minneapolis, and he whited out the whole inside of the church. All this, pictures were gone, the statues were gone, the flowers were gone, because the council said you're supposed to just concentrate on the altar and on the word and on the people. Mm-hmm. Well, I think there was a reaction to that. That took a lot of emotion out of our life, and people wanted the emotion back. But think about St. John's Abbey Church. You don't see wall hangings, a lot of statues. You see people, altar, book, bread, wine, water, song, but not the Hungarian society and the goulash and the, all around the place. In Europe, if you go there, it's like every group had to have their place to hang their banner or they didn't feel a part of it. Well, that all went. Maybe too much went, but yeah. The Triduum, Holy Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I went to that when I was a kid before the council. It was at like 4 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, all squashed together. The vernacular, English. Think about what the church, what Mass was like. Facing the wall, altar facing the wall, priest facing the wall, read in Latin, silent people, what else?
Music.
Kind of guilty stuff. What?
The music was.
Yeah, music was organ.
Yeah.
Go on. Changed it all. The altar as a table, and not just an altar. Big change. This is a sacrifice and a banquet. A banquet. Isaiah has a reading on this mountain. We just read it today at a memorial mass. On this mountain we will have a great gathering. People will come from the east and west, north and south. And they will have fine, juicy foods, fine, choice wines. Some pre-Vatican II people took that part out of that funeral liturgy. Those couple lines. You don't have choice foods and fine wines at a funeral. Yes, you do. It's a banquet.
It's Irish.
Oh, Irish. Which part? The good or the bad?
Fine wine.
Oh, the fine wine.
Italian.
Yes. So the Eucharist is a banquet. Altar facing the people. Eucharist is an act, not static. And that would get some, people up in arms a little bit here. The different Eucharistic prayers. I have some jokes at the end. The Word. So the third document is the Word. The sacraments are now celebrated in the midst of the Word. They weren't. Usually they're at Mass, like baptisms. We don't have that here anymore, but they can be and used to be. If you were baptized here, wrapped around in the Word. Or marriage. That was always, I think, within the Word. But confirmation was a little bit separate from the Mass. Used to have just the bishop came and there was a service and they confirmed. But the Word is what has to be there to give some more meaning to the sacraments. And we're still working on that, I think. 3 cycles of readings. We used to just read one same reading every year, same Sunday. Now we have Luke, Matthew, Mark. I think John got left out of that. I think that's a
John's
mistake.
kind of interspersed with all of the others.
The what?
John's kind of mixed in with the others.
He is, especially during Holy Week, like the Passion, John, we read the Passion of John where he says not the Eucharist but washing feet. He tells us what love is about.
Yeah.
But we're still working. John is the gospel of love, and we're supposed to be a people of love. Adult Ed. I think it's caught more than taught. A lot of people who came up today this lunch, kids don't know their creed anymore. They don't know the 10 Commandments. Well, in part was because we got it that you catch, rather than Catholicism is caught more than taught. You learn it from others by how they love. And so there's mission trips. That's how we teach what's it like to be a Christian these days. Or relational things. Let's have a campfire. What else you doing, Gizzy? Dances and all that. Instead of all up here. And some people don't like that. There's an altar of the Word. I always think I'm sitting at that chair and I see that singer go from the choir group over to the, well, look how much closer it could be. Just go to the song place. Not walking, well, the reason they walk across is that that's the gospel. That's the word. And the altar of the word is that pulpit place. Everything about the word goes from there. Make sense? All right, and then the modern world. This was a huge leap. That is to say yes to the world. Because there are a lot of ways that our scriptures even say, avoid the world. The world will destroy you. Well, it's a part of the world the sinful part of the world would destroy you, but the creation part of the world, the lots of good ways part of the world, this is underlying. Like science, I got some work in psychology, and Freud was out because Freud was the world. And now, maybe in this child abuse thing, we could use a little more science. How do these people get involved with kids the way they get involved? Science might tell us that. Enculturation, meaning when the popes, some of these popes, and those ones that I'm not so happy about, John Paul went to Africa and wore all kinds of native garb. And you can see, like Archbishop Roach has a picture of him with a Native American headdress on. To be a part of the culture that you're going into with your liturgy is a good thing. And to say yes, that we really have two cultures. I'm digressing here, but who was that at Notre Dame 2 weeks ago? Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks is going wild, singing and dancing, and this is all the Notre Dame kids are there. And that whole stadium is full of them. This was the two cultures coming together in a happy way. The Catholic culture and the American culture. And they celebrated. I'm sure he was dancing because in part he was in this setting and saying this is right to be here. And these kids were saying the same thing. Now there are some ways in which the culture and the church go opposite to each other, but the culture, on balance, they're beating the pants off of us, by the way. The culture is more attractive, especially to our young people, than our church is. Because it's got energy and it's got, involvement and not so judgmental maybe, and other things. So we have to figure out how to blend the culture and the church. Now, one of the things this council did was to reverse a Constantinian notion of the church. That's Constantine, like in the 4th century, who made Catholicism okay. Not only okay, established it as the religion of the government, and that freed up the church because we were persecuted till then. But then, through the whole early Middle Ages, the church ran the world, politically. And then the Renaissance split those apart. Well, this council made that split of church and state okay. You don't have to bring it back together again. In some ways, it would be good to bring it back. We have to work that out, but there's ways in which the church and the state are separated, and that's okay. And anyway, I wanted to say something else about that. What it also got rid of was the European church. Before that council, and most of the bishops in that 2600 were more European connected than otherwise. But the church has been a good example for the globalization of the world. We had bishops from Africa and Asia and South America and here all equally and together and mixing it up. And that's the way it's supposed to be. We were more European. Like if you went to Tokyo and they built a church, it might look like the church in Venice. Instead of the different cultures expressing themselves. The signs of the times, we didn't talk about them before, but they're in our liturgy every day. That we're supposed to read the signs of the times. What are the hopes and fears of your people? What are the joys and sorrows of your people? Respond to them. Read the signs of the times. That's a special gift. Not everybody has that gift to say, what the heck's going on in this culture? What's going on in this shutdown, for instance? Underneath it, are there people that can figure out why we're doing this? Or why it is happening? And read the signs of the times and make something out of it. And a lot of other conundrums like that. Mass media, we said yes to that. Not very well yet. And it's so fast, way ahead of us, the social media. And the role of the faithful is in the world. That is, basically, people, the baptized people, are to serve where they work or where they live. Ministry at church is fine, and that's good. To sing or be deacon or whatever. But also, and maybe basically, the role of the baptized is to bring the world to resurrection. A couple other kind of add-ons. Religious life, we know how much that changed, how nuns got rid of the habit for most part, and didn't all live together in convents, could live where they worked, and could work where they found work or wanted to work. Ministry wasn't just in schools and hospitals, it was all over the world, all over the map. And Ecumenism said, no, the Jews, we do not blame the Jews for Jesus' death. It's called deicide. Before that, there was some idea. In fact, Kristallnacht and that whole German shtick was because part of the faith of those German people were Jews were the ones that killed Christ. Let's break the hell out of their businesses. This said it wasn't the way it was. You ever lose your place? But I'm on the last page. You'll be glad to hear that. Episcopal conferences, that's the bishops of the United States. In the Second World War, there was this thing called the National Catholic Welfare Conference, and out of that came the National American Bishops Conference. And we were well ahead of the rest of the world in establishing that. And that's a good thing, because you can apply some problem solutions to your own native area that don't work for the whole world. But Rome didn't like that. That was a distribution of power. If the bishops' conference had the power in this country to do this or that, and it limited, they didn't like that. The reform of the Curia, that's the administrative offices in the Vatican, is still going on. Some future issues. I think I mentioned some things that the council didn't take care of: celibacy, birth control, the nomination of bishops by the people. It all comes. Women. Who? Divorce. Liberation theology, which comes out of South America. It's in John Paul thought it was communist. The access to sacraments, you have to have certain qualifications and dissent, to say no to something in the church, to speak your own. So those things they set aside. But on some future issues like sexual abuse, it's not a future issue, it's a now issue. I'll tell you a story about it. In other words, how these things that the council did could help us today. There was a bishop in Spokane by the name of Topel, T-O-P-E-L, who was a hermit. He had a crock pot on his stove with a soup always going. Anybody that needed food could come to his kitchen. He was that kind of guy. He had a protege, Hunthausen, who was the Bishop of Seattle. Topol sent a priest from the Diocese of Spokane who had abused kids to Hunthausen without telling Hunthausen. Hunthausen says, he never let me know that this guy had a problem. I was looking for some way that the bishops of this country, they're going to meet in February, no, the bishops of the world in February. What can they look to? I thought simple living, poverty, or whatever would be one answer. Take the triumphalism out of the clergy and the priests, so that a priest doesn't feel I can do anything to you, and it's okay. Well, that blew my theory that if we all became like Topol with a crock pot, we'd be better off. But what it sent me to was the people of the church, full, active, conscious, participant people, have to be the answer to this. That is, if a child was a member of the church and the priest was not such an elevated member of the church or a bishop, might I, one, not have abused that kid? And two, if I was a married priest and had kids of my own, would I be less likely to take on some other kid? So, I'm saying the Pope has this image of the church. It's like a pyramid. You know, a pyramid sits this way in Egypt, but he set it up. These are the people. The people are on top, and the Pope is on the bottom. That's, if we get an inverted church, it may answer some of this pedestalization of priesthood. I said that in a meeting yesterday with the bishop because the brochure for St. John Vianney Seminary, where I worked for 10 years, shows a college guy with a cross in a cassock and a collar, followed by other guys in that seminary in collars. These are college men who we dress up like priests. I think it's clericalism. They don't need that. They go home and then they're on a pedestal because, oh, you're studying for the priesthood. And they can't relate to their fellow students, college students, because they're set off somehow. Okay.
So who's keeping it in the wrong orientation?
That is a wrong orientation. All right, that's one. He's going to start this lay advisory committee. That's a future issue that should be a good thing. If we have a synod, let's have a synod.
What would the synod, who would be in that?
I think this thing with the laity, that he's getting one from every deanery, is going to be a piece of that synod. But there will also be priests, deacons, sisters. They had one of these, it was called the Call to Action in Detroit 30 years ago. It was a very democratic thing. What are the issues? They had hearings. It was for the bicentennial of the American Constitution. So they had all kinds of hearings. What should the church be about? And then they made proposals, and they ran it as a Senate. And it worked, but we don't do that anymore. I think another problem for us now is the loss of members. I say one answer to that is embrace the culture rather than stiff-arm the culture. Let the culture blend with this church in its good things, and let our culture blend with it. And it may make this culture more attractive to parts of members of that culture.
Could you give us an example?
An example of, well, like, what's his face? Garth Brooks at Notre Dame. I'm sure Notre Dame should we invite Garth Brooks here? Those kids who are studying whatever they're studying are also in a Catholic college and saying, what should this religion of mine be like? It can welcome a Garth Brooks. So the culture's music, we probably condemn a lot of it. it should be the words, but there are other parts of it that are just
Not every song is bad.
not every song is bad. You guys have to help me find those ways that loving our culture might be a way to attract people to this church if the church isn't very stiff-arming of that culture. If we don't say you're bad and we're good.
Well, I think our church needs to embrace half of its members, more than half of its members. When you look at church,
Women,
yes.
how women are accepted in it.
Clericalism is so, it's total men, and
There.
it's, they're totally.
Need anything else?
Blind. They have their horse blinders on. That's gonna make the
Got
church.
that? Horse blinders.
They are.
That's not in here anyplace, horse blinders.
That's because there's no women in that.
Evangelization, that's a big deal now. In fact, some of our spirituality has gone in that way and away from liturgy. We should be evangelizers like Protestants are evangelizers. Knock on doors. Hi, I'm from St. Joe's, and how's your lawn growing? Whatever. But to bring them to an active liturgy where people fully, actively, consciously participate can also be evangelizing. If this is the source of our spirituality, those people, there's a thing called spirituality, yes. Organized religion, no. I can do spirituality in the woods by myself better than I can do it in church. Well, we have to figure out how we can get across that divide. Okay. Love over STEM. See, I resist STEM in school. Science, technology, energy, engineering, math. I don't resist it, but I'm saying that's an emphasis on cognitive skills. You gotta learn to love more than to learn to engineer. I don't know if I gave you my solution to the shutdown before. This is a joke. I say if Pelosi is on that side and Trump is on this side, you just do that, and whoever gets it gets $2 billion. No, not 5.8. Very good. All right, then a summary kind of thing. I hope you take away like 3, 4, 5 things. One, the primary and indispensable source of the true Christian spirit is found in the liturgy, which is the source and summit of our life in God. I didn't say this in the Church in the World part, but it says, nothing that is truly human is alien from the Christian heart. So someone would say, all of the culture is bad. This does not say that. This does not say that. Nothing that's truly human is alien from the Christian heart. That's why those musicals that they have in the Great Hall, I don't say much.
You're gonna be in.
Right. Do it again.
Yeah, coming up.
The people are the church. And you're invited to full, active, and conscious participation because of your baptism and your universal call to holiness. The primacy of baptism, not ordination, and we are an adult church. Start there, not with the kids. The kids are important. Sorry, Kizzy. So, there, 5 minutes for questions.
Oh,
We're going out to lunch. Yes?
You being there on the inside, how did they get hundreds of bishops to agree to all these changes?
They were ahead of themselves on electricity. They all had clickers,
Really?
you could, to vote. Yes, no, placet, no, non-placet. Placet is yes, non-placet no, and juxtamotive, and maybe or conditionally, or I'm going to abstain right now. Some of these things got 2,500 yeses and 3 noes.
Were those presented by a committee?
They were, yes, there were committees that wrote them,
Yes.
and they gave them a document, and then these bishops could each amend this document by speaking. That's what I did for 3 months. I sat between those pillars in balconies and listened in Latin, which I didn't understand either, to these people saying, no, I don't like that idea about how to change our seminaries, but I like this idea. So they mixed that. That was all in the morning. In the afternoon, they went in little groups and rewrote these things. Then they brought it and brought it and brought it and brought it until they could vote it in. And most of them passed, but a lot of them, they didn't pass anything in the first session. So 62-3, it was 62 fall. Each of these were the fall. Fall 62, 3, 4, 5. I was there in 5. In 62 fall, nothing. They were arguing. Now I have this thing from psychology, and it says all groups go through these stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Forming is, who are you, where are you from, get to know. Storming is you fight for leadership. Norming is you start to write things down and agree, and performing is after you get the agreement, you run with it. So that happened, but it didn't happen in the first session. By the fourth session, Ottaviani was a cardinal who people thought was just off nuts. They were shaking his hand, hugging him, they were loving him up, and they passed a lot of these documents in that fourth session because they finally came to some consensus about it. So it took time, but that's how they did it. And they did vote. There was another question? You only have 2 minutes. No, Bishop Lou.
Father, I spent a fair amount of time today reading my Vatican Council's report. And I came up with a page and a half of questions for you, but
That's full active content participation. In suspenders.
I'm going to limit it to just one. Tell these good people about you and Sean Connery at Vatican II.
Well, we lived in a hotel, the Hotel Michelangelo, which was across the Tiber River from the St. Peter's. But we were dressed up to go. I had a black cassock, collar. I think I had kind of not a shawl, but a cloak, and a black satchel. And I looked, not well like this. They called me 007. 007. The guys at the hotel, when we got on the bus, there's a 007. You didn't find that in that book. All right, anything else?
So after the council, was this a suggestion for the churches to move that direction, or was it more of a kind of command or?
That's very good. The Pope was probably in charge, and the Curia was in charge of moving. One thing I didn't mention was that each of these sacraments was reviewed and changed. And we're still doing that. I mean, you just have something out lately on the wedding where you have to have a Gloria at the beginning of the wedding music. They're still working on it. So the Pope pushed it, but they would bring together conferences, synod conferences, one on youth, one on education. Now this thing that he's going to have in February is kind of a conference. What are we going to do about this global problem of sexual abuse by priests? So they did it, but then each conference did it. We wrote our own documents here in the United States. Some of them were good. Archbishop Roach was chair of our conference when they wrote some good stuff about justice and nuclear war. You know, so who was in charge? I think every parish looked at it. I became a pastor, and I'm just writing a book now about what I did in 10 years as a pastor at this parish that would implement this in that church. And it's going slow.
Father, is there any hope in the future of having women priests or married clergy?
Do I have to make a choice?
Do you foresee that?
Yes, I do. I have both of them.
Okay, who's like that.
Let's get with it then.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's the full active participation. We don't think we have anything to say about that, but you put enough of us together, and they may listen. Like, I think women deacons will be first.
The priesthood, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't have to be a man.
Can I make you a bishop?
Seriously.
And married, what did you say, women priests and married priests?
Yeah.
I would say maybe deacon, women deacons first. Actually, I'm not a bishop today for this reason. I was at that seminary, and the Council of Catholic Women for the diocese asked me to give a talk. So I gave a talk about the future of the diocese. And this was in the 70s. I said by 2001, we will have a woman bishop, Catholic.
Not the thing to say.
No, they picked it up. I get a call from Roche, which is a call from the Vatican. Roche saying, "Now was that your opinion or your wish?" And I said it was my wish. Clunk. So here I am.
You know, the archdiocese here, of course, I was in that area, those of us on the parish council
Yes?
were sent down to the archdiocese, and we had programs down there.
Good?
And that's where we first heard that we were the people, and we were chosen, and we were to do this. The first, first bread was made by, the first homilist was in the home, and where they met was in the home. And they tried to bring it to us.
Yes?
I don't know if there was anybody else here at that.
So you're kind of saying,
Yeah.
if you go to Eucharist, you probably learn what bread is like at home
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. And they gave us a lot of encouragement
Yes.
to become what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I was enthused to see it.
Put a
at
date on
level.
that.
Yeah.
No,
When was
No,
it?
okay. When was that first,
you
Karen?
were 12.
You didn't come on the first.
1970,
Okay.
1970.
It was real close after.
The council.
Yeah.
So that ended in 65.
So it might have been.
This Pope, the good Pope, now I don't know what you feel about the birth control thing, but he wrote, Archbishop Binns was on a committee that studied the artificial birth control stuff and made a recommendation to that Pope that there should be some change in our way of birth, and he rejected that, and he wrote, what do you call it, a pastoral letter, I don't remember the name of it, anyway, rejected and affirmed our approach to artificial, or to conception. Contraception. So that was that Pope in those years. He took it away from the council. The council could not make a judgment about contraception, but he had this committee going. A cute story in the middle of that was one of the members of the committee was a laywoman from the Philippines. Yes. And her family name was Concepcion. She was called Miss Concepcion. Well, I had some other jokes, but I didn't tell you all my Well, this is a priesthood, you heard that one. Jean and Abigail McCarthy came. Jean was our senator. Abigail was a Catholic thought leader. Cowley, Archbishop Binns and Cowley walked all around this Piazza Navona with me, picking out, it was before Christmas, it was like toward the end of the council session, December, camels, wise men, cribs, all that, and they put them as place markers on the table of all the bishops from Minnesota, with Abigail and Jean McCarthy there, and our son. And then she gathered them all up and brought them to her St. Paul home, put them on her mantle, and that became her Christmas card, was the creche that she got from Binns in Rome. learned to say sense of anchovies, because they put anchovies on everything. Callie and I went up to Florence, and you had to pay tolls on the way. Every toll box we got to was 555 555 lira, every time you stopped. There were 2 bars in St. Peter's. They had a break in the morning. One was Bar Jonah and Bar None. Anything else?
Father, one last question, I promise. Primacy of conscience. What does that mean? And what, if anything, did the Second Vatican Council say?
Primacy of conscience is the question. And I think it means the same thing before, during, and after that council. It's one of our basic teaching. Nobody can mess with your conscience. You are the final arbiter of your life. Now, you have a job to make your conscience well informed, but when you make a decision, that's it. Now that fits because some people, like on the marriage and divorce question, if you remarry, you should not come to communion because you're in a second marriage and the first marriage hasn't been annulled. But some people say there are two schools of thought about that. One is that school of thought, you should not receive if you're in a second marriage because the first one wasn't annulled. But another one says you were a victim of that marriage. You got abused and the marriage collapsed or died for that reason or whatever reason, and you want to come to communion, you make that decision. Is this all heresy? No. Good night. Thank you.